Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
All right, so we'll get going. Oh my God, I didn't do last time we talked, I made sure I did the whole Google pronunciation and everything.
Oh,
Then I went back in today and looked at your profile, and you don't only have one amulet, you've got like two.
yeah, actually the LinkedIn, which one are you talking about? I think the LinkedIn one, yeah.
Your LinkedIn profile, right? Exactly.
It's that like it's Gözde, Görce.
Yeah.
So both umlaut, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so thanks for the help on the second one, because as viewers of the podcast know, I'm very bad with the name. So, which is
Oh,
funny because
good.
my wife is Eastern European, but she got a very Americanized name, so it's funny. But listen, so we met in a very funny way, because this is one of the reasons why I do the podcast. I was like 1,000% completely wrong on a subject, and I had this standard joke, and I had put it out on LinkedIn. I don't know, it wasn't. It was Mike. It was in a customer success Slack, and my standard thing is I can't stand CSMs communicating with their customers on Slack.
Yeah.
Right. And my classic joke was, hey, if you like working the weekends, yeah, sure, Slack's great for customers. Right. But then Mike had posted about an article that he did and this is Mike Molinay, who was on the podcast, it's Thena, right? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
How you pronounce it? Yep.
Yeah.
And I was just fascinated, because I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And I had, and again, so glad I was wrong, because the basic, and I'll put a link to it here, and then we're going to expand on it a little bit. What Mike sort of schooled me on was that if you've got a customer and you're highly engaged, why would you cut that out? Like, why would you say, go somewhere else, go
Right.
learn this new other way of working, and go to a community, go to a Zendesk or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
So then we met, and then we started chatting about it. I was like, oh my God, this would be a perfect podcast, because I'll tell you, every time I bring this subject up with people, they just get in more and more detail, and I'm like, I don't know. So I said, let's get on and let's start talking about that. And I'll tell you, the number one thing is about sort of the transition from email into Slack, and what that relationship looks like. Tips and tricks. Would love to hear sort of that. And again, the number one concern I hear, if you can weave it in there, is the setting the guardrails up correctly, making
Right.
sure that you're setting, these are the boundaries and things like that.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm glad that we're having this conversation, right? So as you've noticed, right, like in the industry in general, we have a lot of like this switch between, like from email to Slack.
Yeah.
And I do agree that, it could get pretty noisy at Slack, right?
Yeah.
But, like as consumers, right, like we are in B2B world. However, as customers, like we are getting so used to like getting these messages and responses back in real time. So
Right.
Slack kind of solves that problem, right? Like, and there are some cases where as a customer, you're running into issues or you need a quick response. So instead of like waiting for an email response, it's way easier to have access to your customer success manager over Slack or any other messaging platform like, Microsoft Teams or
Yeah.
any other solution out there. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about that? Making sure that the boundaries are set up correctly, right? Like, because it's funny when as soon as you said that point, I remembered when everybody started expecting text message level, like all throughout life, right? Like to the point where if I didn't respond to like somebody in my family within 5 seconds or 2 minutes, then there's a huge issue, exclamation
Mhm.
marks flying across and things like that.
Right, right. So that's like one of the exciting topics for me to cover today. I think like I could boil it down to like 7 main points, but
Okay.
yeah, so I would say with the shared Slack channel, there are a lot of kind of like features that, CSMs can leverage. Number one thing that I would say is the channel guidelines, right? Like as a
Mhm.
CSM, when you're engaging with your customers, one thing you need to make sure is that they know what the Slack channel is for and what type of topics that you should be discussing on Slack versus email. So that way, you're telling your customer, hey, reach out to me for these, this topics, right? Like so that they know. Number two is leveraging bookmarks. So, as we have on your browser, like we
Yep.
also have this bookmark feature. So let's say you have a great onboarding call. After the call, you want to ping, those certain links, like the FAQ page that you might have, linked to the call that just happened, right? The
Mhm.
recording or anything you can think of that will be helpful for a customer to go to. And, when they land on that Slack channel, they will exactly see, like what are the resources for them.
Okay.
That's number two. And number three is basically, like establishing certain topics like, hey, feel free to reach out to me like for this certain, support ticket, or let's say you have an open ongoing issue and you're
Mhm.
like, hey, I will be following up with you on Slack. So like, don't expect an email. I will be following up over here with
Got it.
exact update for you. So that way they know that you'll be communicating over Slack versus email. Specifically what happens, like, if you have like ongoing support issues and the customer is like constantly pinging support instead of you, and they're occupying that space and bandwidth both from support and the CSM, so you can
Right.
prevent that from happening with that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's kind of
yeah,
that response versus resolution problem, right? Like they want,
right.
hey, we're on it, but it might be a day or two, right? So,
Exactly. So they have the, like peace of mind in
yes.
terms of when they will hear back from you. Yeah, yeah.
I
So,
get it. Sometimes it's, how mission critical the software is can, depend on that. I remember, rolling out like Lowe's.com and things like that, where they were like, hey, oh, right before we go live, by the way, if you mess up and we go down, that's $1 million an hour that we're losing. I'm like, got it, right? I can imagine my Slacks and texts and every other, carrier pigeons, blowing up because of anything going wrong versus say, sometimes it's like, yeah, use this process once a month, right? Like,
right,
let's,
right, totally.
people aren't dying here. Like,
Yeah, we're not doctors or nurses, like we're not in ER.
yeah.
So yeah, totally.
On that note, that's funny that you said that point because one of the reasons why I have this perspective is that my wife, in a bad day, does kill somebody in the hospital, right? And so there's a classic thing where I came home like super stressed out as this company called Bright Cove. Essentially, it's an online video player. And we're rolling out to all the music labels, and the net is that the ads weren't, hey, every 1 out of 3 plays, the ads should show up and play. And then it wasn't happening. I come home like all stressed out, and my wife's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, yeah, so a 14-year-old boy in Germany can't watch a Britney Spears video." And then I was like, just hearing it come out of my mouth versus like, yeah, so I lost somebody on the table today. Yeah, it's a little bit of a different story. So,
Totally. Yeah. I mean, luckily, we are not on the other side. Yeah. I mean, God bless your wife. Yeah. It's a whole different line of business. I have so much appreciation, but I'm glad I'm not on that side.
you and me both. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah.
Awesome. Sorry for my digression. So yeah.
Oh no, you're totally fine. And yeah, I kind of wanted to also cover like one of the beauties of Slack is right, like the customization and integration. So imagine yourself like you have a lot of reactive customer outreach coming in,
Yeah.
and this is a strategic customer. They are maybe pushing the limits of your product, as you said, right? Like in the case of you mentioned. So it is really like helpful to use some of the products like Thina or a few others out there that could help you automate that, create like the ticketing system, basically, right? Let's say every time a customer says this, create a ticket that directly goes to customer support. Because what could happen is that if you don't use those kind of platforms to help you automate that process, your CSMs end up being this bouncy ball between customer support and the customer to create the ticket, to follow up on the ticket, and resolve the issue and get back to the customers. So there are a lot of steps that you can prevent.
And I can tell you, I've had series of meetings about CSMs being like, this is the paragraph that you type back to them. I will create it for you. This something feels to me that if it like automatically pops up like a taco or whatever, just like whatever the automation does, like God, hey, we're going to create that support ticket. But I just love the fact that it's created for you, instead of my previous classic thing was like, go to zendesk.xyz.com and and go there and then go create your ticket, and don't ever do that again because you're a bad customer, right? Like it's a little bit of a happier sort of, it's an automated response, right? And there's ways to phrase it with the customers, like, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of it for you, and things like that.
Yeah, totally. And that brings me back to also the response time, right? Initially, I think your concern is really fair. Like, as I could see, like from my team, the response time is something customers like they need to be kind of like aware of what's the cadence and what's the kind of SLA on that. So they tend to wait like a response within an hour or two. But as a CSM, you are like jumping on zillion different calls, right? Like it is fair to say, hey, I'm going to be able to get back to you in 4 hours because I'll be done with my meetings. Or you could link in again your support, as an interim solution and say, hey, I will be actually working on this, but I don't want to delay the process. So I'm looping in my support team and things like that. That way your customer, number one, knows that you are on it. And, and they have an immediate, person to talk to. Instead of you, it's support is somebody else, right? That's really important.
No, I agree. One thing I was questioning about, because it seems every customer I walk into, they're all in the same situation where they have like hundreds of Slack channels, right? Just hundreds, like, because there's one customer, and then there's internal, and then there's external, and then there's like, and then a new thing gets created with new customers, big problem, red team, and all this. Like, I don't know if there's a fix for this besides like, you need to get your act together and Marie Kondo your Slack, but like, I didn't know if you had any tips or tricks around that particular issue as well.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think it's a constant challenge. Like I know some companies are doing like they kind of have a limit, or if you want to create an like private channel, you have to go through IT. So that kind of prevents that like overwhelming number of channels. For I would say external channels, what I tend to do, my best practice is to group them together under your favorites. So that way, like you see like what's popping up as bold on like kind of more like bold white versus others, so you can take a look at those first and then the internal channels, right? Like that's kind of my best practice.
I like that.
But I do like the first option of IT limiting the number of channels.
I do too, because I can just picture some of the responses like, oh, it's the same group, it's just minus one person. Like,
right. Oh, like really? Why do we need that? Yeah, I totally get that. And lastly, like that happens too. So, I mean, realistically, you're not going to have a shared Slack channel with every customer. So like, I think that's number one. And the ones that you will be having, it's most probably like the customers, they mean a lot to your, company overall in terms of ARR and like strategic standpoint. So what I would recommend is as a CSM, it is really easy to overwhelm yourself. Like if you're going to PTO or, for some reason you're out of office, what we tend to do, like in my previous practice, is like have a coverage for the days that you're out. So that way, you're not like overwhelmed, even when you're in PTO, that, oh, I have to get back to this customer and things like that. So I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, CSMs can't ever relax on vacation. It's such this, I won't say martyr, but there's just this like, it won't survive unless I'm there, like just pushing it along, which I think some of these automations could really help out with just some mind space control around, like it's all set, it's taken care of, it's automated. I'm just going to put pause for 1 second. There's a lot of noise outside. I don't know if you hear it. So 1 second here.
Sure.
I love the fact that my kids are outside playing, so I don't want to, like, hey, stop making noise outside. Go in and pick up the computer. Sorry. Yeah, go from there.
No worries.
So sorry for the interruption, but yeah, again, on the on that mind space aspect of as well, is like it's taken care of. There's a process. That seems like that will help that issue too, because some people just have a little. They're afraid their customers aren't going to be able to have their problems answered and things like that. If you spread your coverage out amongst the other team, you're like, well, they're just helping out. It's not their customers, like they're my customer and things like that. So exactly.
Yeah, totally. And, like, and another topic I wanted to kind of go over, like a few other use cases for Slack that I'm seeing, right? On in addition to like the engagement between customer success and the customers, and this is more towards like partners, right? I think a great example is Zendesk and how Zendesk is using shared Slack channels. So this is really interesting. What they do is their sales team is using Slack shared channels with partners that they work with. So let's say you have a customer, maybe they're blocked in onboarding phase or an implementation phase. So a sales team can immediately reach out to their partners and say, hey, we have this potential customer for you guys. Do you think this will be a right fit? So again, instead of like, going through like email introductions and everything, they have already an established Slack channel to have these proactive conversations. And that's something that,
which is much better, because I remember in the old days, there was a portal that you had to log in, you had to register a deal, you had to go through all of that crap, essentially. So,
which is a very tedious, process, and your customers are looking for like an interim quick solution, and you out there trying to figure out like the logistics internally, right? Like, And I think the other thing that I get a lot of questions about, they're like, okay, Gözde, great, like you have all these best practices about Slack and how to use Slack shared channels, but I'm having a hard time monetizing this process. Right? Exactly, right? Like it is definitely a great premium solution to offer to customers. But what happens is sometimes, and it's really common, so when the customer is in the sales process, the sales team get really excited and they would actually create this shared Slack channel before even customer gets introduced to customer.
Absolutely. I see this all the time. Yeah, exactly. That's why you wind up with hundreds of Slack channels, because everybody from your 100K deal to your 200K deal gets, or should I say 10K deal up to 200, everybody gets a Slack channel. And then it's hard change management saying, oh no, that was just for the sales phase. And then the disappointment continues on and on and on.
Exactly. So to prevent that, like what I recommend is having these conversations with sales team, right? Like in coming up maybe with a package of like customer success services that you could actually establish these rules before even your CSM team is, like starting to work with the customer. So some of the things that, like I recommend is having an alignment with sales on what type of customers should have access to Slack, and what should be the pricing. Is it maybe a percentage of the license fee that they're already paying, or is it just, the number of like hours that your CSM will be spending? So whatever makes more sense for your product.
It sounds like a good segmented approach, right? Like enterprise, I like it, the approach where you're saying basically like you're on the top of the triangle, right? You're enterprise, and our enterprise customers get this. What I'm curious on is it a CS package or a support package or both, right? Because everybody's used to the support, good, better, best type of a thing. CS is a little more of an interesting story, where maybe it's wrapped into the license fees. instead of an add-on. But that's
Mhm.
are you seeing are you seeing people do pricing their CSMs that way? Because that's a hot topic these days. So
Yeah, I know. Actually, I've been starting to see that a lot. So it will get like added as an add-on, which will make it more clear because we all are like super busy and like nobody likes
yeah,
to read contracts. So like when you
yeah, yeah. But
add
I
a
on
line,
that note, I'm so
yeah.
glad you brought that up because I love making these smaller little things like real as
Uh-huh.
little a la carte options on an order form because it makes it look like it's such an implied thing where it's like, oh, your enterprise, you're going to get the 5K CS package, and it's like it is versus this like, oh, hey, maybe you like this thing, and it's this conversation back and forth, but it's on the auto order form. You get X amount of hours, boom, 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 and done. Versus this, let's negotiate it through, and it becomes kind of squishy and no rules around it, and
Yeah.
CSMs wind up working way too many hours again. So yeah,
Totally, totally. And like to add to that topic of many hours, right? So like what are the dedicated hours? Like in one time it happened with a customer, like CSM was on Pacific time, customer was in East Coast time. And there wasn't any language around that in the
mm,
contract. So the customer kept pushing and like slacking that CSM. It was really frustrating for the CSM, right? Like, and you cannot be working on both time zones. So I think it's really important to add the working hours, like as
yeah,
well, depending on, like the CSM and the timeline of the customer. Um, yeah, and I'm seeing that more and more where this is becoming a more like top-down, like strategic approach where the package is all set, like CSMs know what they have to deliver, customer exactly knows what they will get from that service. And they're also paying for it, so they want to make most out of it.
right.
And they also want to follow the rules because there's a contract in place, right?
I mean, again, you're speaking my language here because it's the value, right? And things that are valued, you treat with respect and you value it because you're paying money for it. This is why
Right.
I'm always like charge implementation fees, charge for this, charge for that. And it might be a small amount, right? And it's not like, hey, we're going to try and make $1 million more with Slack
Right.
channels, but it's like, oh, I'm going to respect this because it wasn't just this little throw in that's, just assumed and tossed in there.
Totally. And to add to that point too, what I'm seeing is sometimes like there will be products or like where you don't have a lot of upsell opportunities or expansion. So having this like Slack added to, an upcoming renewal because the customer wants to expand or they want to, implement a new product,
Yeah.
it helps actually CS leaders to justify the value of Slack and, like the CS team as a kind of like add-on for certain customers, not
Yeah.
for all. And the good thing is if it's like coming from leadership team, CSMs feel much more like secure in the way that like they are having these conversations with customers and they feel valued because not all the customers are getting, and there's a price tag for that service, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely really important.
No, and I knew none of these, so that's why we're chatting because people were like, "What are some good guardrails?" And I'm like, "Oh, the only one I have is, oh, you have Slack and implementation where it's a lot of back and forth, and then it moves to CS, and it's not so much back and forth." Or it's
Well,
no, actually my rules are typically around it's not for support, and we'll fire off an automation for support. But these are the segmentation alone. I hadn't thought about that at all. And that's and just this other segmentation plus monetization. That's
mhm.
huge. That's amazing stuff right there.
Well,
Awesome.
love to hear it. Glad that we're expanding the horizon with use of Slack and how to monetize
Right. That's
it.
great.
Yeah. Well, I think this is like all I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this was super helpful. What are some of the so let's I wanted to cover off. I don't know if there's one that we're missing at all, but like
Mhm.
things that I hadn't thought of before was the partner stuff, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
that's great. This monetization and the segmentation aspect, the support stuff, which is sort of the only thing I've been thinking around of it. Have you seen? And there's could be no, but like because it's we're so early days and anything.
Yeah.
Any creative ways or anything that you've seen that maybe not for everybody, but like just kind of blew your mind or was like, wow, that's a really cool way to approach this problem.
Yeah, let me think about that. Like, it's still new. I've been entertaining this question a lot with like CS leaders who
Yeah.
are approaching Slack shared channel as like a really premium feature.
Mhm.
What I'm seeing though, it's still like really in the early stages, and majority of the startups are like getting, trapped into that like kind of process of sales, having these conversations early on and not informing customer success. So it's really hard for CS leaders to own this process just yet, like fully.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing is the automation is a big part, but the problem there is that CS leaders, they want to actually have like platforms like Thina, for example, to have like automation for Slack. The challenge is that because either they're not charging the customer or there isn't any, like revenue associated with this, they're having hard time justifying in bringing in automation solutions like Thina, for example.
You're right. But if you
Yeah,
had a cost, I was thinking about it for a resource when you started talking about like the segmentation and everything, right?
yeah,
Imagine you had 10 enterprise customers at like $200,000 ARR
right,
or something like that. And then suddenly you're able to then upsell them with an additional like 10K
yeah,
for your enterprise CSM packages, which allows X, Y, and Z. I'm not saying that covers their entire salary, but that, suddenly you get 100K in on upsell, and that can go towards a resource. You
right.
see that, it's still startups don't justify like CSP costs sometimes. So I can see where it's like hard to bring in automation, but I can see if you're even able to get around certain tools, like if you don't need a Zendesk, for example, right now, but to be
Right.
able to have some automation just to make sure things are being taken care of and not forgotten. Because I see
Yeah.
certain people like, yeah, we get like 15 requests a day. It's not enough to justify that. But so what are some additional things we could do? And that's where stuff like this popped into my head as well too.
No, that's a great question. Actually, tools like, automation platforms like Tena, it helps like the CS leaders to have an understanding of how much time the CSMs are spending. It's not just automating that process, but it gives you visibility into how much time they're spending instead of doing that over, like Google Sheet, asking your CSM to, like put it out there. And that's like a more real-time kind of like analytics into how your CSMs are spending their time. Then that can get integrated into headcount analysis, right? And then you
Yeah.
can go back to your leadership team and say, hey, like last 12 months, this is how much, time we spent, how much revenue we got, and here is my proposal for next year into the headcount.
And I've
So
done that, by the way.
yeah,
I had a customer that this number's a little shocking. It was shocked at first, and then I found more customers that kept doing it. That their renewals were down, and so when the data went through, found
Mhm.
out that I think it was like between 75 and 78% of their time was spent on support tickets. And there was a support team, but because they had this relationship over Slack and there was no automation, that the CSMs were like, well, they came to me. I don't want to then go file an internal ticket. It was like Jira ticket at the time and stuff like that. But then, yeah, we started adding up all the costs and everything. And it was like, this is crazy, right? Like, so that's what we got to pay for, like, for the Zendesk and stuff like that to get rolled out. But then like the training and then hopefully the automation and a little bit as well too. But like first things first, but like it's essentially making that revenue amount of busy work or this amount of inefficiencies is
Mhm.
causing X amount, which is mind blowing for me to see it up at that numbers. Yeah.
No, I totally agree with you. And I'm so glad you brought this up, actually, like, the collaboration between customer success and support. So I tend to see this trend with especially like CSMs that are kind of like early in their career. And as you said, they don't want to, like turn the customer back and just say like, go to support.
Yeah.
So it's like the most important thing is to have that alignment with customer support and your CSMs on in which scenarios they have to direct the customer to support
Oh yeah.
by feeling comfortable enough to say like, no, you have to go to support, right?
Yeah.
So when there's that ambiguity on which case is which one and who needs to own it, so the swim lanes in between two teams also, like, it has to be clear,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that plays into what exactly you just said.
Yeah. No, you're right. There's that. There's the like the 100% referenceability problem with startups, right? Where they're just like do whatever, like wash their car. I don't care. Like, get that high CSAT and everybody's happy and everything. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well,
So
also that was awesome. I appreciate that because this is like knowledge that like you and probably five other people have out there and everything. Um, you just came back from I think Puerto Rico, so it's hard to
yeah.
say like what's the next fun thing that you're doing. But summertime's coming. Are you staying in the Bay Area? Are you doing any traveling or what's you got coming up for the fun non-work stuff?
Fun non-work stuff. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Your memory is great. Yeah, I just came back to the Bay and I'll be traveling in Europe this summer. So it's been like, I think ages for me since the last time I've been there.
Yeah,
I think I told you about this. I will be in Poland in
that's
August.
right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
because my wife's from yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. We talked
Yeah.
about that. I'm really excited about that. And with the remote work, I really enjoy like working and traveling at the same
I'm
time.
so jealous. I know it's great. I feel crazy like when I go in town to the Cafe Nero and work from there. I'm like, look at me, like I'm working outside the house.
The
But my
success, like you were able to get out of the house, right?
yeah, yeah. I think what I remembered, and if I didn't say this, 'cause
Uh-huh.
I'm older and I forget things, but the good thing about going to Poland and eating the food is it's not like Italy where town to town everything changes.
Right.
Like, you're like, no, that's Olive Garden style versus like Mediterranean style. Like, because I can tell you, I'm 50% Italian. My grandparents were from Italy. It tastes nothing like when you go to like Olive Garden or something like that.
Oh yeah.
But Poland, totally different. It's always the same. Like you could go to most restaurants in most people's houses and this isn't a complaint either. Like it always tastes amazing. Like certain
Yeah.
things I would need, but like the pierogies, like all that stuff, like kapusta always usually tastes the same. And it's great. Yeah. Eat as
You
much
know,
kielbasa as you can. So yeah.
I'm so glad you said that because I'm a person with a lot of FOMO. Like I'll be like, oh, like I don't want to miss out on anything. So when those kind of like regional differences are there, I'll be like, oh, like let's go here, let's do this too. Like,
Yeah.
so hopefully I won't have that in Poland when it comes to
Yeah, you
food.
can go to some like because this happened to us in Chicago when we went to the Polish district recently. Like
Mhm.
it was like somebody's house, like it was like they converted
Oh,
their
wow.
house into like a little shop, and there's
Mhm.
like the babushka in the back like yelling and wooden spoonful. Like I'm not kidding, and it like still tasted the same as like my wife's mom's cooking and stuff like that. It's just
Love it.
so you won't get your FOMO on your trips there. You can put down your Polish Yelp and just find any place and
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Can't wait.
That's awesome. Well, listen, thanks so much. I know you're super busy for taking time out of your day.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jeff. Let me know if you need anything else from me. But this was great. I'm really appreciative
Yeah,
of
no,
what you said.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we'll stay on for 1 second. I'm going to end the podcast and then we'll wrap up with some final
Okay.
details here. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Awesome.